You're live now, so you can start.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this important day. Today marks the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. This year, official UN theme is Unite to End Digital Violence Against All Women and Girls. Why this theme? Because digital violence is now one of the fastest growing form of abuse. Online harassments, doxing, cyber stalking, and non consensual sharing of images are amplified by the new technologies like AI generatives and deep fakes. And as UN remind us, online abuses rarely stays in online. It inflicts real world harm on women's mental health, careers, and safety. I am Pratibha Damodran, your host for the day. I am joined by my colleague Atiti, who will facilitate our discussion. Before we begin, quick note to the participants. Please use the chat respectfully. We will have the Q&A session towards the end. This session is being recorded. Thank you, Atiti. Here you go.
Thank you, Pratibha, and thank you everyone for being here. It means a lot that we're gathering on this day to talk about something that is very often invisible, but we have all heard of stories and it's extremely real.
Okay, so to start off the tea, could you just tell me a bit about digital spaces, what they mean to you, and why this conversation matters also?
Okay. Okay, so I think it is extremely important to first understand what a digital space is. So, a digital space is any online environment where we connect, share, and we interact with each other through technology, right? So, they could include social media, any forum, chat room, or any platform, right? Where people are talking to each other or viewing each other's content, right? So the thing about any digital space is that they help us build relationships. If you think about places like WhatsApp or Instagram or even places like YouTube, there are relationships being built, there are connections being built between people, right? And they also help us exchange our ideas and it makes the world more connected, right? So this means that digital spaces are very liberating spaces, right? They give people a lot of freedom, they allow us to connect with each other across borders, across cultures, and they also help us share our stories. A lot of new movements or revolutions and things like that are coming across through online spaces, and it also is a space especially for women and girls to learn more about the world around them, right? But alongside that liberation, it also becomes a place of surveillance, right? Because you are giving your content or your pictures or your views or thoughts about things, it means that there is people who are able to access it. And therefore, if they want, they're able to surveil or sort of monitor your and whatever you're doing, right? Along with this, there can also be things like silencing and harm. Certain voices are given more importance than others, certain voices are completely silenced, right? And the same platform that gives us things like visibility and sort of exposes us to the rest of the world, it can also expose us to things like harassment and abuse and exploitation, just like the physical world can. So, like you mentioned in your introduction, an important part about online violence is that it can follow you everywhere, right? If we talk about physical spaces, we have been brought up with the idea that there are certain spaces that are safe and certain spaces that may or may not be safe. So, if you go back home and you close the door, and if you're all alone and things like that, chances are, I mean, the chances of safety are much higher, right? But with the online space, it can follow you everywhere. So any place where you're sharing your thoughts online can become an unsafe space, and it can also spill over into your real life. So that is an important distinction to make, and it is important because everyone looks at online violence or digital violence and they think of it as just anonymous threats and things like that that are being made online. So nobody thinks about the real life impacts that these kind of violence or harassment can have. Yeah.
Yeah, right. I'm sure that we all heard these stories and this newses where people face online and digital harassment. Okay, since we are talking about how these spaces shape our lives, and I'm curious about what digital violence look like in these spaces and what kind of things should we keep mindful about it and we should watch it out.
Right. So when we talk about digital violence, we're talking about all the ways in which that an online space can be turned against women and girls,
Yeah.
right? So it's not just one behavior or one comment or one thing that people do. It is a spectrum of things, right? It can be multiple different acts or mindsets or thought processes that can lead to silencing or intimidating or even endangering people. So it makes it important that we look at it as a larger issue of how people think and how that can lead to digital violence. Because if we look at it, the violence in digital spaces is coming from people, right? So it becomes important to focus on their mindset. So very often we look at online abuse and we hear these stories, but it gets sort of confused with or conflated with criticism, right? So if there is a
Yeah.
video online, for example, and there are people underneath harassing or abusing somebody, very often the argument is that everyone has their own opinion, right? And the argument is that they are just criticizing. But there is a big difference between putting out how you think differently from a person who is sharing their thoughts and how you abuse or harass them, right? Those are two very different experiences, but they're often confused as the same thing, or it's used as an excuse for abuse and harassment. And similar to the real world, women and girls are often told that they are the ones to be responsible solely for their safety, right? The similar arguments of, you shouldn't dress like that or you shouldn't go to these places is carried over online. A lot of times, the argument of why is she posting pictures online or why does she have an account is given as a sort of justification for why this behavior is okay. And unfortunately, that is the mindset that a lot of people carry with them. But it's important to understand that everyone has a right to have a digital space, and for the most part, everyone has a right to have that safe digital space.
Yeah.
So it's important to not minimize digital violence as something that will happen regardless of whatever we do. And it's also important to not minimize it as just online behavior, right? And not normalize it, because it will only deepen the impact and only encourage people to do this more because there is no consequences. Like you also mentioned in your introduction, the rise of AI is a big
Mhm.
thing that we're seeing, and it makes new forms of abuse possible. A lot of us talk about the benefits of AI and how it can be very useful, but more and more we're looking at how it can be very misleading, and it also has very large data related questions that we should be asking, right? That is, anyone can take any picture and change it and share it across the internet through AI. And that can be misused, especially if people who are already engaging in online harassment or abuse. That's a very real thing that can happen. Another thing that makes online harassment more prevalent and why it is thought of as something that is so widespread and so normalized is because of anonymity, right?
Yeah.
People can create accounts with any email ID or any phone number, and they don't need to share any information about themselves. You could have an account called 1234, and it could be a blank profile, and you could be using that account to harass or dox people. And we'll get to the types of online violence soon, but that is something that happens on a day to day basis. And that anonymity, while it is useful in some spaces, it is also extremely easy to get away with harassment, right? In the physical space, you know that there is an individual behind this, you know who the individual is, and the reporting becomes much easier and things like that, right? But with an anonymous account, it's much harder to actually take action, right? Which is why it becomes one of the fastest growing places where gender based violence is increasing, right? And like you said, it shapes people's mental health. The more harassment someone faces, or the more abuse someone faces online, can lead to bad mental health outcomes. People's careers, people's reputations, people's physical safety can all be threatened by online harassment and abuse. So unless we take it seriously, we risk sort of normalizing the very spaces that should make us feel more empowered and connected and things like that. Another important distinction to make is that this kind of violence, like physical violence, is not experienced equally across the board, right?
Yeah.
Some women are more vulnerable to this kind of violence or digital abuse than others. And this is where discussing things like intersectionality and different people's different identities and what makes them who they are becomes an important part, especially if we're talking about policies and ways to deal with online abuse and harassment. So when we think of violence, our minds may straight away go to physical violence or domestic violence because that is what we have seen or that is what we have learned growing up.
Yeah.
But that is an urgent and important topic to discuss. But since our theme is online abuse, it's important to understand how largely fast growing, fast paced changes this brings into how we deal with cases like this, right? So it demands as much attention as the offline spaces do.
Yeah, can't deny. I agree completely. So, I would also bring up a concept or this new word called intersectionality here. So, my understanding of intersectionality is about how different aspect of a person's identity, like gender, caste, community, sexuality, religion, overlap can create a unique experience of discrimination or the privilege. For example, challenges faced by women in a marginalized caste is completely different, and it also looks very different from a women from a very privileged background. To me, intersectionality is a reminder that we cannot take women as a single uniform category. So there are layers to our identity, and these layers also shape how violence is experienced. So I would like to hear from you. Uh, why are we connecting intersectionality to digital violence, and how this helps in understanding the issue better?
Right. Yeah, intersectionality is exactly what you described it as, right? It's exactly about these overlapping identities. And when we're looking at any kind of violence or abuse, it's important to look at it from a broad lens. It's not something that happens in isolation. It's not something that happens without reason. It happens, and it's not something that happens randomly, right? So if we
Yeah.
look at digital violence, for example, since that's our topic, if we have a woman who lives in an urban area, who is
Mhm.
financially privileged, who has family to support her, who has maybe a good education or comes from a place where about 80 to 90% of the people are educated, and this kind of online abuse or harassment happens to her, there's a lot of things that can be done, right?
Yeah.
Because there is an understanding of I need to advocate for my rights, right? She probably has better access to legal help, right? She probably has certain advantages in society that may not be carried on to someone else. So, for example, someone in a more rural area, more less educated area, maybe from a lower caste or less privileged financial background, any of these disadvantages, and this is just an extreme example, but all of the things that make us who they are put us in a certain place socially. And the people who are in a better place socially are more likely to be able to handle or deal with or have better outcomes when and if they do go through this kind of harassment, right? But like we said, someone from a less financially privileged or a rural background, or someone who's from a place where the mindset of people is not really women oriented, or understanding of women empowerment, the online harassment has a higher chance of spilling into physical spaces, right? It has a higher chance of people silencing her, people blaming her, or people making it her fault, right? So all of the parts of ourselves
Yeah.
really impact how, and first of all, how this kind of violence may happen to us, or why this kind of violence may happen to us, and also how we may have to deal with the outcomes of it, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so The reason we're connecting intersectionality to this topic is
Mhm.
because it is at the core of the topic, right? It dictates how and when and where and the outcomes of digital violence. And it's important to look at, especially if we're looking at solutions, if we're looking at policies, if we're looking at it from a mental health lens, that we cannot create a one size fits all solution. We have to create a solution that works for multiple different kinds of um, situations, right? Because not all women have the same kind of harm or the same degree of harm, and not all women have the same resources to deal with the situation when it does come up, right? So it's very relevant because without this lens, we might unintentionally carry forward these inequalities, and
Yeah.
that's something that these women face already, and all of us may face already, and it's while designing policies or solution or even having discussion like this, it's important to factor that in.
Yeah, when it comes to intersectionality, I believe it gives a very narrow down and a concrete, rather than generalizing the system, it is going to be very perfect to pitch in where this starts. So thank you, Atiti. That was a good way of breaking it down. I really appreciate how you connect intersectionality to digital violence because it reminds us that solution cannot be one that fits all. So, to continue, I would like to take this conversation to the next part. We have talked about why intersectionality matters. Now, let's look into the different forms of digital violence themselves. Could you walk us through some of the most common forms of women and the girls experiencing online, or maybe the online harassment that show up in their daily routines or day to day?
Right. So since we're talking about the UN theme, right, of Unite to End Violence, they list four main categories of digital violence, and I think those are the ones that are relevant to talk about. Right. Of course, there are overlaps between them. There might be more kinds of digital violence, but these are the ones that take center stage. So the first one is going to be online harassment or trolling. Right. So this can look like multiple different things. It can look like abusive comments on Instagram or YouTube or even chat forums and things like that. Or it can look like threats towards people of this is what I will do to you or this is what, etc. Right? And again, we see this very commonly against women in digital spaces. And we also see it may also look like coordinated attacks where it seems like someone has said something and everyone under the in the comment box has decided to disagree or attack this person, right? Regardless of, this can happen regardless of whatever they're talking about, right? And it could just be them expressing their opinions or talking about a slightly controversial topic or things like that. Now the goal of this harassment is often to silence people or to make sure they don't, or to help them with, or to make them withdraw from public spaces, right?
Yeah.
Because if they have gone away from public spaces or if they're not talking about this anymore, in a way the person has won, right? So there's also something called doxing. So DOXXING. This is where someone's private information is like their home address or their phone number or things like that is shared without consent or without their understanding. So I'm sure we have heard of cases like this where people's um, private information, their phone number, their address is posted in their social media or on a chat forum somewhere. And when that happens, strangers online now have your private information. They know where you live, they know how to contact you, and it's different if someone puts out a work address or a work email ID versus someone online finding out your home address or your personal number and sharing it online. And this is a place where easily it can go into a physical or offline space, right? Where the people who are threatening you online can find you in real life, right? There's also the next one is going to be non-consensual sharing of images, right? Often these images are going to be intimate images, and very often this comes from places like relationships that went bad, or men who felt insulted or rejected, and things like that, right? And this can also be sort of the negatives of this can be increased with things like AI, and generative AI, which can create deep fakes. So
Yeah.
it can go from, okay, this person shared their intimate images and now that's gone online, versus this
Mhm.
person has a regular Instagram account like everyone else does, and those
Mhm.
regular normal, holiday pictures or whatever it is, have been taken and converted into AI deep fakes, and now they are being shared online, right? And that is, it makes the violation even more complex, right? Because tracking
True.
down who is doing what where is going to be much harder, right? We also see cyber stalking and impersonation. So cyber stalking is when someone is being surveilled or monitored
Mhm.
excessively online, right? Impersonation is when someone is pretending to be the person. So
Mhm.
you see Instagram fake accounts of someone, or you see their pictures being reposted on some other account, or someone pretending to be them. That is impersonation. And if someone is obsessively watching or tracking someone online, that is called cyber stalking. So this can again spill into offline life, right? Because chances are, especially with features like maps on Instagram and maps on Snapchat, people can find you in real life if they're looking for it, right? And we might think it's a fun feature to have, to know where your friends are, but if we really look at how much access or how much information we're giving to the world around us, if someone is stalking you, it's easy to find, right? So it can also, once this happens, once cyber stalking starts, it can create a lot of anxiety around being watched or about around being followed. And yeah, so these harms, like you said, don't stay off online, right? Someone stalking you, someone impersonating you, someone sharing your images can easily create anxiety. It can create lots of depression. It can create very situational, overwhelming situation, and it can carry on into day-to-day life, right?
Yeah.
So someone who's harassed may not apply for jobs that need public information about her, right? Or a student who is being bullied online may not want to come to class anymore or talk to her
Yeah.
peers anymore, right? Because you don't know who is bullying you online. And someone whose private information has been shared now may have to move homes, or discuss with their family why this is happening, and things like that. So if you look closely, everyday examples of this are everywhere, and especially in the spaces where we work, we might see this happening very often, right? College students being mocked for their appearance or for their any feature of themselves. um, Someone who is a woman starting a new venture or talking about a controversial topic is facing trolling or sexist or misogynistic comments in her profiles, right? Or someone is being pressured to share their photos or threatened with the photos and things like that, right? So when we talk about digital violence, we're not talking about one or two specific behaviors. We're talking about the ways in which women's participation in these digital spaces is being monitored or is being policed or controlled, right? And again,
Yeah.
the excuse or the sort of justification given is just don't have a profile, but that is not a realistic solution to this, right? Yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. When you were describing all those things, I think I was able to connect much more. So I asked myself a therapist. I have one case similar to this, and she was a teen, school-going teen, a teenager. And since this online class was happening during the COVID time, and she was mocked by her own classmates, and certain rumors were shared in the group WhatsApps and everywhere. So, though even it was just online, the impact was profound. She started to, her self confidence dropped. She stopped participating in any type of discussions. She began questioning herself, and so much of self criticism began. So, when you were talking about all these things, I was able to connect to this case because this is very close to my heart. And I'm sure many of us can see similar cases, whether through our works or the communities. And that's why it is so important for the students, professionals, even therapists ourselves, understand not only digital violence looks like, but we should also be mindful about how we can respond to it. So, Aditi, can you just share some of the strategies or solutions? I know there is no perfect solution to it, but some strategies that can help these harms, and what can be the platforms, communities, or the individuals can actually make or look this digital spaces safer.
Right, right. So, like you said, as therapists, we see this happening in real life on a day-to-day basis, maybe on a smaller scale, maybe on a less intense scale than the examples that we've discussed, but we do see this happening. And in my
Yes.
experience, I often see students struggle to make sense of it, right? Because, like we said, we have been told to look for the signs of domestic violence or physical abuse, right? And we know those very clearly, but when it comes to digital violence, the lines are blurred on us, right? So the instinct of students is either to minimize it and just say it's an
Mm,
online thing, it's not affecting my real life, and they try to minimize it as much as they can, or to
yeah.
completely be overwhelmed and powerless to it. Both of which I do understand where that comes from, right? But our role here, and as institutes or as anybody who is dealing with this or having someone close to them deal with this kind of violence, is to
Mm-mm.
recognize that whatever happens digitally is still part of real life, right? It's not some
Okay.
distant thing, it's still an experience that you are going through, right?
Mm-mm.
And it has consequences in the sense that there can be things that we can do to get to the bottom of it or to help them out or to help figure out who is at fault for this and things like that, right? So yeah, so there are a few steps that we can always fall back on. The first one is
Mm-mm.
awareness, right? To help, especially if we're talking about student populations, to help them name what they're experiencing, right? So this similar thing of what we did, of these are the four types of digital violence, and this is what to look
Mm-mm.
out for. Giving that awareness or giving that psychoeducation to students is extremely important. But also to have an understanding of recognizing when it starts to happen, right? So if there is a group chat that goes from just teasing to bullying, to start to identify that, hey, that is the point where it went from normal conversation to harassment or
Mm-mm.
bullying or things like that, right? And it also, once they start to name it, that is a very powerful
Mm-mm.
first step in helping them either step away from the behavior if that is possible, or to reach out to someone who knows what to do in this situation, right? Or to take it offline if that's possible and have a real life conversation about it if needed, right? To get help from the people around you who can help you in these situations, right? So all of that begins with awareness. The second step is having a little bit of digital literacy and also boundaries when it comes to digital spaces, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to think critically about privacy settings.
Mm-mm.
If I had to give you an example, very recently when the Instagram Maps feature came out, I had multiple students talking to me about it just casually and about how it was going to be a fun way to figure out where their friends are going and things like that. So to start that conversation of, is this really information that we want people to have, right?
Mm-mm.
And is everyone in my circle or everyone in my Instagram following list, for example,
Mm-mm.
am I okay with all of them having that information? Would I be
Yes.
okay actually telling people these things? And if I'm okay with telling them, then that's fine. But if there
Mm-mm.
are people I don't know who they are and I'm not sure and I just accepted their request, or if I have a public account, that is something that I encourage students to critically think about, right? Who they share information with, what information is being shared, and if and to figure out what their boundaries are, right? Because again, digital spaces, boundaries become blurry.
Yeah.
Someone who messages you on Instagram or whatever else, you if they came up and spoke to you in real life, you may not speak to them, right? Because you
Mm.
might have some concern about them. But because it's a digital space, that boundary is a little blurred. So to, I mean, not to say to, alienate people, but I'm just saying to figure out where your boundary lies in terms of what
Mm-mm.
conversations you're comfortable having online, what opinions you're okay with being online, right? Because everything you put online does represent you as a person. So to have them critically think about it, where your online space can be merged with the real life space in certain situations, right? And sometimes just that awareness of, oh, these boundaries can be crossed is something that they never think about. And then the next thing is to seek support, right?
Mm-mm.
So many students, if this is happening, they feel isolated, they feel like this has never happened to anyone else and it's only happening to them. So to have them understand that, first of all, it is a lot more common than we think it is, right? And the more we complain or the more we report or the more we actually use the safety features given in apps, the more we can advocate for the safety features being better in the future. And also, the more we talk about it, the more we hear other people's experiences, and we'll be able to use the resources, say counselors or professors or campus rules and things like that to our favor, right? Because there are rules against bullying and harassment and things like that, and they carry over to the online space, right? So recently in our campus, we had situations where people's pictures were being shared. Um, and when we went to the administration, we brought it up, the same rules that apply for physical bullying and harassment translate to online bullying and harassment, right? Because it is still within the campus, it is still between students on campus. So that is something that the students didn't know until we brought it up, that this could be something that they could do, right? So understanding that institutional systems and the counselors and the people around them are there in case such a situation happens is a very important thing to make them aware of. And finally, I would say understanding the systems, right?
Yeah.
So explaining how the platforms work and what information is public, what information is private, right? And what reporting mechanisms exist, right? I'm sure there's some imperfection in the way the reporting system works, but at least if you report an account, or if you block an account, or if multiple people report an account, there can be some action that is taken, and we don't have to just continue to live with this online bullying, right? And sort of adding on to this is, we always tell people that if they think that there is an instance of digital violence or bullying or even something that crosses their boundaries is happening, to document everything as it happens, whether it is to take screenshots or to save chats or to have any record of this that they can
Yeah.
provide us. It makes it a lot easier for us or for anyone to take it forward, right? Even if you're talking as extreme as going to complain about it to the police and things like that, if there is proper documentation, there's a lot easier ways to do this, right? So yeah, documenting things is always something that we suggest. And finally, to just allow students to exist in digital spaces, gain confidence in digital spaces, right? But remind them that there are certain things that can go wrong. And if they do go wrong, to figure out what their plan in that situation would be. Right. So the solution is again not to pull anyone from digital spaces or to make them police themselves, but to allow them to exist, but have a backup or safety plan, as we would in real life as well, right? This is what we do in physical spaces. We say, of course, you can go on the train alone or wherever alone, but be aware, be alert, be have an understanding of what could go wrong and what you would do in that situation. So I think the same thing translates into digital spaces as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Atati. So, yeah, as a therapist, I think we should also help individuals to understand, to name the situation as well as understand it and how to respond to these type of abuses or the violence against them when it comes to digital. So, I think participants are joining. I think it's a good moment to take a pause in the conversation. And we can have participants to share their ideas, or they can just talk about how safety looks for them in the digital space. Anybody is willing to answer it? What does safety look like for you in the digital space? I'm sure everybody is using all social media, so I'm just waiting to hear the answers.
You can put it in the chat box as well. I can read.
Yes. I think everybody is quietly reflecting on the stories or the incidents they just handled, but I'm not sure. Okay, thank you. Even though you didn't speak, I know many of you were reflecting on it. Sometimes just sitting with these ideas are important as voicing them. What I'm hearing is digital safety means different. It's a different thing to different people, and that's exactly what today's conversation matters. It reminds us that there is no single answer when it comes to digital violence because more of anonymous people and anonymity is maintained. But there is also a collective responsibility to keep pushing it more safer and more inclusive for the everybody. As we come into our session, I want to thank my colleague Aditi for guiding us through such a thoughtful discussion. And thank you all for being present. Before we close, I will invite Aditi to share one last reflection or takeaway we all can carry with us.
Right. So I think talking about digital violence is not just because it is the day for it, right? It should be an ongoing conversation. It should be a conversation that we, whenever we talk about violence or abuse, or whenever we talk about bullying and harassment, to not exclude the digital spaces, right? Because, like we said, it is the fastest growing place where abuse and harassment is happening. And when we see it, and when we see news cases or reportings of it, we might think it's a faraway topic for us, right? Because usually we hear about celebrities or public figures being harassed or bullied online, and some people find that that's not an issue for them because it's happening because they're a celebrity. But realistically, it can happen to anyone. It can happen because of any opinion, however inconsequential you think it is. It can happen at any point of time, right? So my closing thought would be that it's not just about stopping harm or stopping people from being online, but it's also about building safety online, right? It's about creating a space where people feel okay to share their opinions and don't fear constantly that they will be bullied or harassed, right? And I would also say to sort of add on to this, to be able to differentiate between someone criticizing and someone harassing or bullying
Yeah.
is one of the most important things that we as people teaching this to other people, or even as students in this space, should learn and should understand, right? And it's also important to think about how every woman, girl, etc., deserves to feel safe, to feel respected, to feel heard, or just to have lack of, like, to not have fear in any space. Yeah, right. This could be physical, it could be digital, and across every space. Right, that safety, that need for safety is extremely important. And if we keep that need for safety in mind, whatever we do, whether it is helping people report or ensuring that the cases that need to have action taken, or even just listen and hear out people and help them vent it out and understand their experiences. Whatever we do, even the small things, can start to make a difference in making people feel safe. So yeah.
Beautifully said. Since I see many participants are joining, I would like to describe a small case which we are recently dealing with. So, she's a 21-year-old woman and she's active on Instagram. So, she'll be posting her daily vlogs or daily pictures, something related to the day. So, the senior repeatedly sent unwanted compliments and checking in messages. When she didn't respond to these messages, he started creating a fake account. So through the fake account, he started to look her how actively she's participating and all unwanted comments because again the name was anonymous. She began restricting herself and stopped posting Instagram, deleted several accounts, and she just lost a hope or she didn't trust anybody when it comes to the digital media. And she started to blame herself not being careful. So can you see how this table has turned here? And the impact is like she's being fear of watching. So when someone look at her in a very casual way, she'll be just thinking, okay, was this person? Oh, this person is that person who is messaging me in Instagram. She was hyper vigilant, like she was feeling shame for being active on Instagram or being active on other apps, and she reduced self expressing herself. So she just calm down or she just put everything down to herself, and whenever she opens any type of social media, not only Instagram, any type of social media, she feels anxious. So this anxious thought, this anxious belief started to increase, and it also was very severe to her. Whenever she receives a notification tone in her mobile, she was very anxious to open it.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And
so
yeah. Yeah, we can see how it's spilled over into real life, right? I'm sure that
yeah.
now if she wants to have meaningful connections, chat with her friends, or even just look at other people's Instagram profiles or post a picture because she's doing something fun, and just engage in regular digital activity, she questions everything she does. And again, the anonymity carries it forward. But I'm sure there are things that we can do to make her feel like digital spaces can be a safe space, right?
Mm-mm.
Either in terms of having boundaries or in terms of trying to get to the bottom of the past situation. And even just giving her the option of, hey, you can report this, you can talk about this, you can share about this, can make a big difference. And I think that we are getting further and further ahead in terms of tracking people and figuring out who's at the bottom of this. So, yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to digital violence, I believe people are trying to normalize it. So everybody is like, okay, even I get harassed, doesn't matter. But it's different how individual perceive it. So digital violence isn't something small or imaginary. It shapes the students' academic, emotional, and the social responsibilities also. And I think when it comes to digital violence, the right planning, right validation, and skills also helps them to overcome or rebuild their selves.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I understand. So since we just into the session, thank you, Atati, so much for bringing and sharing all your thoughts on this. And with that, we wrap for the today's webinar. Please look into our recordings, feedback forms, and the announcements about the future events from Symbiosis Center for Emotional Wellbeing. Thank you once again. Let's continue to unite against the digital violence, not just today, but every day. Thank you. Thank you so much for participating and thank you for being present. Thank you, Atati.
Thank you. I think we'll be here for a few more minutes if anyone wants to stay back.
Yeah, if anyone wants to have a question towards this, or if anybody wants to share your thought when it comes to digital violence, or if anybody want to share your experience, please feel to share it.
Hello, ma'am. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm Supriya here from Department of Student Welfare. We had
Yes, ma'am.
recently one case that actually a student, I'm not naming the institute and all, let it be
Yes, ma'am.
confidential only. So the student has joined new batch of Symbiosis,
Mm-mm.
and after their induction ceremony and all, after some days, the girl is getting one mail from anonymous mail ID, that
Mm-mm.
proton something is mentioned in the this thing. She is not able to, somebody from the class, that is sure, from her class
Okay.
sending, and the
Okay.
mail is coming very dirty language and very क्या बोलते हैं, ugly messages, all that mentioning in the continuous mails, 3 4 mails coming. But we were not able to find out, in spite of giving lot of sessions in the class and telling the what will be the after effect if anybody is doing all that. We have all the committees in everything telling, but nobody was here coming forward to tell ki who is doing. But as per the mail, we were able to find that guy, whoever is writing that, he is coming to, he or he must be he only, getting all the knowledge about her movements, about her day-to-day activities, everything. But till now, in spite of long lot of meetings, everything, we have not found who was that person who was sending that mail. So in that case, that girl plus her parents were in very much stress. What they will do? We were giving some options. Okay, you just shift from your hostel where you are staying. But she was already with her friends. She didn't want to move. Lot of options we were giving, but they were not ready to accept that. But the problem is not solved, but for some time now mail is not going, so we are happy that it's something is stopped. But I don't know after some time if again it goes. So how this all, but how they are able to send mail from the anonymous mail, and how it is so difficult to find the person, it is little worrying all of us.
Right. So yeah, multiple things can be done. First of all, to report any email that is coming from this email ID or any other email IDs that are similar to this, to report it to Google or to Gmail.
Yeah, that all we have done. We have written to Proton, all that we have done, but no response from all that side. We have not got any response.
Okay. So then to discuss with the person what information they are putting online, right? And similarly, if we know it is from the class, right? And if we know it is from this thing, not that she shouldn't talk to her friends and things like that, but to be aware of who she's sharing this information with and what exactly information that person has, right? And that they're sending across, and to try and track this information and see where it is coming from. Right now, because it is happening in the class, definitely the institute can get involved in terms of she can raise a CDC and they can help to figure out who this is coming from.
Yeah, that all we have done, but we have called CDC. We called some, she had given some names. We called all that students to find out if they have sent, but from that all we could not make it who was the exact.
Okay, I think the next step would be if the family and if the person wants to, they can report to the cybercrime cell as
Yeah.
well, right? There is a website, there are cyber police stations that they can go and they can report this to. If they don't want to get that help, unfortunately, we can't do anything about that. But you can always refer them to SKU. You can always refer them for counseling and mental health support.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to share an experience or an incident? Okay. Thank you. If you're feeling to share something in private or you just want to talk to us in private, you can always reach us through Mind Help. So through Mind Help, we provide counseling sessions, and your counselors, campus counselors, or your point of contact, you can talk to them in person. You can just mail Mind Help mentioning your name, your PRN number, and your mail ID and the year. So your campus counselors will reach out to you, and you can book a slot with them, and you can share, you can have a conversation. So counseling doesn't mean you should have an issue or you should have a problem. It doesn't mean that. If you're feeling lost, if you're in a confusion state, or any type of help you need, also any type of guidance you need in an incident or in a situation, you can always reach out to your campus counselors. And thank you, and that's the end. Thank you so much for everybody, and we'll see you in the next webinar with some interesting topics. Thank you. You can leave.